In this War Master video we shall take a look at the changes to the army lists and the core rules for 2026. As always, the updated army lists and rules compendium can be found on the author's website, where you can download it for free. We shall begin by looking at the changes to army lists in the order that they appear in the army list book. All the following changes were proposed and voted upon by the Rules Committee. First of all, we have the Empire Army. The Empire has seen a change to the War Altar mount for a wizard, which turns him into the Grand Theogonist. The War Altar is now a copy of the Dark Elf Cauldron of Blood, in that it adds 2 attacks to the character upon which it is mounted, but reduces their move to 30 centimeters. You still get the same bonus to cast a spell once per game, but there is now an added tax that you can only field a War Altar if you have at least 1 unit of Flagellants in the army. Its cost remains at 15 points. There were also 2 other proposals that would have affected the Empire Army should they have passed. The first was to increase units of Knights from 110 to 120 points per unit, and the second was to cap said units of Knights to 3 per thousand. However, neither of these proposals passed the vote this year. Next up, it's the Tomb Kings. This year, all armies that can field chariot mounts for their characters have seen a 5-point reduction in cost. Therefore, you can now mount your Tomb King and Lich Priests on a chariot for only 5 points. Next is Chaos. And Chaos have also seen a 5-point reduction to the chariot mounts for their characters. Next up are the Orcs. Firstly, the Orcs have benefited from the same chariot mount reduction in price to 5 points as the other armies. Secondly, the Orc General has been given a special rule for no extra cost. Once per game he can tell his lads to get stuck in, and for the rest of that command phase he ignores the command penalty for enemy near on any order that he issues. This change is to rectify the perception that a 2-order infantry charge is often very hard for Orcs to pull off. Next are the Dwarfs, who have seen significant positive changes this year. First, there is the introduction of an entirely new unit called Dwarf Miners. These are a light infantry unit designed to support the heavier warriors in close combat. Their profile of 3 attacks, 4 hits and a 6-up armor save for 60 points is a direct mirror image of Orc warriors. You may only take 2 miners per 1,000 points, but they're cheap enough to give a nice boost to the Dwarf Army's breakpoints, which allows you to experiment with different tactics. Next up, Dwarf Rangers have had their special rules clarified so that they no longer impose a command penalty for orders given in dense terrain. And this now brings them in line with other infiltrating units such as Gutter Runners. The Dwarf Gyrocopter has had its hits value increased from 3 to 4 at no additional cost, whilst the Anvil mount for the Runesmith has been reduced in cost from 50 back down to 30 points. There was also a proposal to remove the special victory point conditions for Dwarf Troll Slayers, but this did not pass the vote. Next are the High Elves. High Elves can now field a cheaper chariot mount for just 5 points. There were 2 other proposals for High Elves which did not pass the vote, the first being an increase in cost for Silverhelms to 120 points per unit, whilst the second was a change to the High Elf General rules in that he loses command 10 if he ever rolls an 11 or 12 for a command test. His command would revert to 9 from then on, and his price would be reduced to 155 points. If you like the sound of this experimental rule, then look out for its appearance in the War Master Journal. Next are the Skaven, who've seen a minor clarification to the rules for the Warp Lightning Cannon. It clarifies that this follows the rules for the High Elf Bolt Thrower Artillery to avoid any confusion with actual cannon artillery because of the name. Next we have the Lizard Men. Firstly, Saurus have seen an increase in their points cost to 80 points per unit. The Saurus's Reptilian rule was felt to be outweighed by the Army special rule of ignoring dense terrain, therefore their price has gone up. Meanwhile, salamanders have come down in price and are now 20 points per stand. There was also a proposal to increase the cost of Cold One riders by 10 points a unit, but this did not pass the vote. Bretonnia is next, and they have seen a change to the Hippogriff mount option, which can now also be taken by a hero instead of the general. There's still a limit of 1 Hippogriff per army, however. There were also 2 proposals which did not pass the vote, the first being an increase in cost to Knight units from 110 to 120 points, and for Grail Knights from 120 to 130 points. The second proposal was to limit the number of Knights in the army to 4 per 1,000, with Grail Knights and Pegasus Knights being in addition to this total. Next we have Kislev. The special rules for the War Wagon have been clarified once again in reference to how it moves and forms Lager formation. Next come the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves have received the same chariot mount price reduction as other armies. There was also a proposal to increase the cost of Cold One Knights by 10 points, but this did not pass the vote. We now move on to the Demon Army. And this year the Demons have received a chariot mount as a new character option. This was felt to be appropriate as the army has units of chariots. Next are the Vampire Counts. Proposals to increase the cost of Black Knights to 120 and cap them at 3 units per 1,000 both failed the vote. Moving on, we have the Araby Army. Firstly, the rules for stampeding units of elephants have been clarified, so they should be more straightforward to follow. Next, the Sunstrike magic spell has been clarified and brought in line with other similar spells such as Ball of Flame from the Empire list. There were proposals to increase the cost of Knights to 120 points per unit and cap them at 3 per 1,000, but both failed at the vote. Moving on now to the Dogs of War. The major change this year is to units of pikemen. Whilst their stats and points cost remain the same, their special rules have been altered. Pikemen can now no longer enter any form of dense terrain in the same manner as cavalry. They can still claim defended status in certain terrain, but only when fighting to the front. No enemy unit gains bonus attacks for charging pikemen when they charge them in the front. However, pikemen never receive bonus attacks when they charge themselves. Pikemen stands cannot offer infantry support to other types of infantry, nor receive it, but pikemen stands now can mutually support each other. On the tabletop, what this means is you're likely to now see pikemen brigades deployed as 4 units, 2 in line supported by 2 in line. This formation can generate 18 attacks across a 12 cm frontage with 6 support. Such a pikeman block is now a truly fearsome formation. The solution, obviously, is to hit them in their now very vulnerable flanks and roll them up. Finally, there was a proposal to increase the cost of Knights to 120 points, but this did not pass the vote. Rolling in next are the Ogre Kingdoms. All the spells in the Ogre list have had their wording clarified and brought in line with similar spells from other army lists. There is now a full description of how the spells may be targeted, how long they last, and what their effects are. This now prevents misinterpretation and tidies up what was a poorly worded list. We now move on to Albion. And the chariot mount for characters has received the same 5-point discount as other armies. The name of the Albion Cavalry unit has also been changed from Cavalry to Riders, which follows the naming convention of Warriors and Slingers. And secondly, the wording of the Downpour spell has been clarified so that it now matches the description of other similar spells from different army lists. Next up are the Goblins. And they've also received a 5-point reduction to the cost of their character chariot mounts. Moving on, we come to the Witch Hunter army. The Witch Hunters have received an addition to their list, which is the War Altar Chariot Mount, which is now a copy of the version available to the Empire. The War Altar grants +2 attacks and a one-time bonus of +1 to cast a spell, in exchange for a reduction in movement to 30 centimeters, and a tax that you must have at least 1 unit of Flagellants in the army, which is not a problem for Witch Hunters. There was also a proposal to increase the cost of Knights in the army to 120 points per unit, but this did not pass the vote. Next are the Chaos Dwarfs. And they've simply had the wording of their Meteor Storm spell clarified to bring it in line with similar spells from other lists. Next we have the Wood Elves. War Dancers have now come down in cost by 5 points at 25 points per stand. 3 of the 4 Wood Elf spells have also received changes this year. The first is Twilight Host, which now has a reduced casting difficulty of 4+, but only lasts for a single turn, and is now identical to similar spells from other lists such as the Chaos Dwarfs and the Norse. Next is Call of the Hunt, the wording of which has been completely overhauled. The wording now follows the convention of similar spells from other army lists, although the Wood Elf unit moved by the spell must still be able to charge the enemy, who in turn may not stand and shoot against it. It also clarifies that characters may not be moved by means of this spell, which was woefully lacking from the original wording. And lastly, Fury of the Forest has been rewritten so that it's clear how the spell may be targeted. Moving on now to the Beastmen army. Firstly, Bestigor have received a 5-point increase in cost to 80 points, the same as Saurus Warriors. As Bestigor have no negative traits, it was hard to justify their cheaper cost at 75. And secondly, the Chariot Mount option has been reduced in cost to 5 points. The Norse army is next, and they've received a name change for their cavalry unit, which is now called Hyrd Horsemen, or you can shorten this to Norse Horse. Moving on now to Cathay. The Cathay Chariot Mount is now reduced to 5 points, and there was another proposal to add a Sky Lantern mount to the Cathay list, but this did not get past the vote. Finally, we come to the Nippon army, and the Shrine mount for the Shugenja has been reduced in cost from 50 to 30 points. That now concludes the summary of changes to the army lists for 2026. Now, in addition to changes to the armies, the author, Alesh, reserves the right to make any changes to the compendium rulebook that he deems necessary, and this is not subject to any voting process by the committee. The first is an optional rule for heavy cavalry, which is defined as any cavalry unit with 4+ armour, and they will now suffer an additional -1 command penalty for any second or third order that they receive. This has been introduced to limit the power of knights, which some players believe are too dominant when taken in large numbers. Therefore, if you feel that knights are a problem in your local gaming circle, you now have this optional rule in order to rein them in. The second optional rule concerns light infantry, which is defined as any infantry unit that has 6 up armour or no armour and a ranged attack. If such a light infantry unit chooses to use its initiative to make a burst through evade move by moving through friendly units, then those friendly units will not be automatically confused, but only confused on the roll of a 6. Now this opens up some interesting tactical options. Normally, missile infantry will be brigaded with melee infantry in support, the irony being that in order to use their missile attacks, the missile infantry has to go on the front line, where they are more likely to be engaged in combat by the enemy. By using this optional light infantry rule, you now have the ability to retreat your missile infantry through its supporting melee infantry, and then potentially charge into combat with the melee infantry, although this is not without the risk of confusion. However, to prevent any shenanigans, the light infantry optional rule does clarify that should a light infantry missile unit use this ability, then it cannot then be dragged back into combat via a supporting charge. Now, a top tactic that I would recommend is to brigade your missile infantry in line at the front of a brigade with 2 units of melee infantry in line directly behind. When the enemy gets too close for comfort, you can use initiative to evade the missile infantry through the supporting melee infantry units. Then, provided you haven't confused them, the melee infantry can then use their initiative to charge the marauding enemy that have got too close, and they can drag the 3rd line of melee infantry with them in support. Next, we have some changes to the core rules for combat. The first change is to the order in which units will fall back from a drawn combat. Instead of rolling off to see who moves first, now it is always the player that is due to take the next turn that has to fall back first. This removes an extra dice roll from the game and will make it harder for the player who's due to move next to set up a flank charge. Next is changing to the word for advances, and this is more of a clarification to confirm that in order to have an advance move you must have destroyed all the units that were engaged in combat with you in the previous rounds. And this does apply to any enemy units that were separated from the ongoing combat in the second round. In other words, if you haven't wiped out every enemy unit that you were in combat with during round 1 by the end of round 2, then you're not going to get an advance. And lastly, we have a clarification to the rules for unresolved combats. A unit which has become locked in an unresolved combat cannot receive orders. Although most veteran players would never consider that this would ever be the case, some new players have raised it as a question as it wasn't previously explicitly stated in the rules. The next series of changes are to Magic standards. Firstly, the battle banner has its price graded according to how many attacks the recipient unit has. Any unit which would generate 5 or more attacks when it charges has the highest cost, so this includes chariots, boar boys, Cold One riders, and winged lancers and wild riders. Meanwhile, units with only 3 attacks have a cheaper cost, and units with only 2 attacks cheaper still. The recipient unit increases its attacks value by +1, and will only lose this banner if they lose a stand and you roll 1 to 3 on a d6. This is now an incredibly good value item for any unit which you wish to mark out as being elite. You know who you are, High Elf Swordmasters. There is also a change to the banner of shielding, which can now only be given to units with 5 up or 6 up armour. So a unit cannot get better than a 4+ save thanks to this banner now. And once again, there's now only a 50% chance of losing this banner when you lose a stand. This is perfect for representing a far more resilient unit, such as High Elf Phoenix Guard or Empire Greatswords. The banner of Fortitude is now 30 points but can only be given to a unit with 3 hits, and will only be removed on a 50% chance when you lose a stand. This means that no unit can possibly have 5 hits anymore. A great option would be to try this banner out on a unit with a good armour save such as Knights or Huskarls. The banner of Steadfastness is now price graded according to the unit's armour save, and because the effects are only lost with a 50% chance whenever you lose a stand, it's a great cost-effective option for any unit you want to deploy as a missile screen. And finally, the banner of Fortune is now cost graded according to the number of attacks the unit can generate, and is a handy insurance policy against Rubber Lance syndrome. Next is a change to the Ring of Magic, which no longer grants automatic success, but instead allows you to cast a spell on the roll of 2+ regardless of its casting value, and you cannot claim any other bonus to cast from other items or abilities. This introduces an element of risk into an otherwise sure thing, and makes the Ring of Magic a less attractive auto-pick. The Scepter of Sovereignty is now only 20 points, but cannot be used by High Elf or Dark Elf generals. For Dark Elves, this is put in place to deny the army the ability to ignore their characteristic blunder rule, while for High Elves it simply limits the general's access to reroll a failed command. The Scroll of Dispelling is now no longer an automatic success, it will only work on a roll of 2+, and this added element of risk makes the Dispel Scroll less of an auto-include. So with these changes, you're less likely to now come across armies with both a Ring of Magic and a Scroll of Dispelling every time you meet them. And finally, there's a change to the Orb of Majesty, which now cannot be used by Dark Elf or High Elf generals. This is partly to curb the power of Command 10 in these armies, and also prevents the Dark Elf from bypassing his Blunder rule by using a reroll. The Orb of Majesty would now make a very attractive big shiny boss hat for an Orc general when combined with his new special rule. Furthermore, there are some minor changes to the 6 scenarios in the rulebook, and further clarifications for the rules for fighting sieges. And this now concludes my video explaining the changes to the armies and the core rules for 2026. Thank you to everybody who contributed with their ideas, and please keep providing feedback to the Rules Committee based upon your playtesting over the coming year.